Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Adrian George. I'm Director of Exhibitions and Museum Services at ArtScience Museum, Singapore. Thank you for joining us this evening for the opening event of Climate Conversations. Climate Conversations is a program of online talks set alongside National Geographic's Planet or Plastic exhibition, which is currently on show at ArtScience Museum, Singapore. These talks will bring you some of the most urgent and profound stories by climate scientists, ecologists, and artists who are working at the forefront of conservation and climate innovation today. Planet or Plastic is the first show to launch at the museum since our reopening after Singapore's circuit breaker. But this project has been on the cards for quite some time before that. The exhibition shines a spotlight on the fragility of our natural environment as a result of the global plastic waste crisis, something I know that many in Singapore care about very deeply. It's hard to believe, but each year, almost 9 million metric tons of plastic ends up in our oceans, and it's likely to stay there for centuries. More is washed up onto our beaches, and even more is carried by ocean currents, becoming entangled and forming floating garbage dumps in the middle of our seas. All of this is destroying the delicate ecosystems that are critical not only to our planet's health, but to our future survival. But we can do something to fix the problem. And that is exactly what Planet or Plastic, the exhibition, tries to address. The exhibition aims to raise awareness of society's dependence on plastic by visually depicting the crisis and highlighting those innovative individuals, organizations, and communities who are working on solutions to this important problem. We are delighted to open our Climate Conversation series with a talk by Cynthia Doumbia, who is Director of International Exhibitions at National Geographic Society. Cynthia is responsible for the placement and promotion of National Geographic exhibitions to venues outside the United States. And in her 15 years at National Geographic, she's delivered projects in more than 40 countries. And those projects in turn have been seen by millions of visitors. Cynthia will be sharing with us how Planet or Plastic, a multi-year initiative by National Geographic, harnesses storytelling to tackle the plastic waste crisis, and in so doing, effects very real and meaningful change in our world. This evening, we are live streaming on both YouTube and Facebook, and we would love to hear from you throughout the session. So please share your thoughts and questions in the chat boxes. We'll be starting very shortly with Cynthia's talk, and then in the second part of this evening's program, we'll be taking questions from the floor. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Cynthia Doumbia.
Good morning, everyone, or evening, depending on where you are. And thank you, Adrian, for this kind introduction. If we can put up the slides, please. As Adrian mentioned, I am the Director of International Traveling Exhibits at National Geographic. And each year we present exhibits of impact both at our museum in Washington, D.C. and around the world. And I'm happy to be able to speak with you this morning about one of our latest exhibitions, Planet or Plastic, which is currently at the ArtScience Museum in Singapore. But first, let me start with a quick video. For more than a century, National Geographic has believed in the power of photography as a means to illuminate the issues that affect our world. The Planet or Plastic exhibition builds up on this legacy of visual storytelling by showcasing the global plastic waste crisis and highlighting innovators working to solve this urgent issue. Next, please. So far, the Planet or Plastic exhibition has been displayed in 7 countries, including the US, Australia, Mexico, and various countries in Europe. We are pleased to be partnering with ArtScience to present for the first time in Asia in hopes of inspiring citizen engagement here as well. Next slide. Our multi-year initiative aimed at raising awareness about the crisis to reduce the amount of single-use plastic reaching the ocean was launched in June 2018 with the magazine cover story. The iconic cover appeared on 37 local language editions of the magazine and was read by millions of people worldwide. Next slide. Here you see an image from one of our early editorial meetings where we're outlining our plans for the exhibition. Tens of thousands of images from 14 different photographers were narrowed down to 52 pages for the magazine article. So we knew that we had our work cut out for us when deciding on the narrative for the exhibition. Next slide. But we also knew that we wanted to take visitors through a journey from the history and importance of plastic, its rapid production over the last several decades, and subsequent pollution of the environment, most notably our world's ocean, to STEM and consumer-based solutions. We settled on a combination of still and video photography, infographics, maps, and quick digestible facts that are dispersed throughout the exhibition. Next slide. Each section of the exhibition utilizes a combination of visual and multimedia elements to effectively communicate the theme of that section. Living in the Age of Plastics provides an introduction and context to how this man-made material has revolutionized society. Plastics, a modern marvel, tells the story of how in just 150 years, plastic went from invention to ubiquity. The dark side of plastics looks at how the surge of plastic manufacturing is contributing to a mounting global problem. The haunting art of plastic pollution showcases the work of visual artists, forcing us to face our waste. Science in Action deals with the cutting-edge science and technology that are providing new solutions to help to the plastic crisis. And finally, Steps Towards a Cleaner Future provides solutions that each individual can take to help reduce our reliance on plastic. And I'll be going over a few key images from each of these sections. Can we show the next video, please? The candied colored plastic trinkets shown in these photographs seem innocent enough, but their sheer volume hints at a larger issue. These images were taken at the EU International Trade City in the eastern Chinese province of Zhejiang. It's the world's largest wholesale market for small commodities and a plastic feast for the eyes. More than 70,000 booths housed in a series of connected buildings sell everything from inflatable pools to cooking utensils, artificial flowers, and more. To photographer Richard John Seymour, the market felt both utterly familiar because its goods are found everywhere and completely foreign because of its mind-boggling volume. China is the largest producer of plastic. It accounts for more than a quarter of the global total, much of it exported around the world. Next slide. The first synthetic plastics were invented in the mid-1800s as a result of a promotional campaign to save wildlife. Piano keys, billiard balls, like the ones shown here, combs, and trinkets were made of the same scarce natural material, elephant ivory. With the elephant population at risk and ivory expensive and hard to come by, a billiard company in New York offered a $10,000 reward to anyone who could come up with an alternative. An amateur inventor named John Wesley Hyatt took up the challenge. His new material was made of cellulose, the polymer found in all plants. Aside from sparing elephants, cellulose also helped change billiards from an aristocratic pastime to one that working people could enjoy. This is just a trivial example of the profound shift plastics would bring to all aspects of society. Next slide, please. Plastics came into widespread use during World War II and were used for parachutes and protective equipment for soldiers. After the war ended, plastic manufacturers had to come up with new ways to sell their products. They adapted materials used on the front lines to suit life at home. Americans embraced the advent of disposable products, as you can see from this image from a 1955 Life magazine article entitled Throwaway Living. The family is celebrating the dawn of single-use products that cut down on household chores. No more washing dishes. Next slide, please. More and more products began to be made from this miracle material. In the 1960s, global plastic production increased more than 400%. By 1979, we were producing more plastic than steel. Plastic revolutionized all facets of life, including automotive safety. By the 1980s, many car parts, like seatbelts and airbags, were made of plastic. Around the same time this image was taken, there was concern over plastic waste beginning to build, thanks to a highly publicized landfill shortage in 1987. Next slide. In many areas of the world, clean water for washing, cooking, and drinking is not readily available. Since plastic containers are lightweight and tough, they're an excellent way to transport water distances. In this image, residents of a parched district in Delhi, India, swarm a tanker to siphon water into plastic jugs. Next slide, please. The amount of plastic waste generated each year is astonishing, and most of it isn't recycled. After sheets of clear plastic trash have been washed in the Birenganga River in Dhaka, Bangladesh, a woman, aided by her son, spreads them out to dry. This plastic will eventually be sold to a recycler, but less than a fifth of all plastic gets recycled globally. Photographer Randy Olson shot nearly 50,000 photographs across 7 countries for his assignment, documenting the plastics issue. Next slide, please. It's hard to deny the magnitude of the ocean plastic problem in the face of images like this. Swimming with manta rays off the coast of Bali could be an astonishing experience if it didn't involve navigating through a literal sea of plastic trash. The waters off this tropical paradise are especially polluted during the rainy season, when loads of plastic trash are carried downstream through the island's rivers and waterways and wash out to sea. Next slide. Thank you. This image has become iconic. It was a 2017 Wildlife Photograph of the Year, and yet photographer Justin Hoffman wishes it didn't exist. To ride ocean currents, seahorses clutch drifting seagrass or other natural debris with their tails. The debris acts as a sail, whisking the tiny seahorse across the current. In the polluted waters off the Indonesian island of Sambua, this seahorse latched onto a plastic cotton swab instead. Next slide. Ocean plastic pollution is such a massive problem, it can only be framed by incomprehensibly large statistics. For example, some 18 billion pounds of plastic ends up in the ocean each year. Just how much is that? It's roughly equivalent of 1 million garbage trucks dumping their payloads straight into the ocean. That's where photographers, artists, and activists are stepping in. They are visualizing the problem of ocean plastics in new ways. Plastic waste has been found in the ocean from the Arctic to the Antarctic and from the surface to the seafloor. It might be a little bit hard for you to see on the screen, but the pink circles represent plastic found in the open ocean, the larger the circle, the more pounds per square miles. The yellow is plastic from large river basins washing out to sea. Next slide, please. Plastic is turning up in our planet's most remote areas, such as uninhabited Henderson Island in the South Pacific. In 2015, researchers found it awash in trash, mostly plastic. They cataloged 53,000 pieces in a sample area and put the island's total at 38 million. Each dot represents a single piece of trash. The pink dots indicate plastic trash, and gray dots represent all other trash. The largest ring that we see on this screen is plastic fragments, but there's everything from crates to fishing line, glass bottles, and cutlery. And that tiny yellow square on the far right of the screen is Henderson Island. Next slide, please. And here's a picture of tiny Henderson Island. It's one of the most remote places in the world, yet the trash found on the island originated from Russia, the United States, South America, Japan, and China. Next slide, please. A fledgling Laysan albatross named Shedbird died just before this photo was taken. When the manager of the state of Hawaii's Cure Atoll Wildlife Sanctuary cut the bird open, she found a stomach full of plastic. The entire contents of the bird's stomach are arranged on the right. You see bottle caps, lots of plastic fragments, and even whole lighters, unfortunately, in this bird's stomach. Next slide, please. And it's not just large marine life that is affected. This water flea is only 3 millimeters long. The microplastic it has ingested glow green. In a lab, water fleas were exposed to round microplastic beads and irregular shaped plastic fragments. The experiment concluded that the irregular pieces pose a greater threat than the round pieces because they can clump and get stuck in an animal's gut. Microplastics are these tiny pieces of plastic visible only under a microscope. Next slide, please. When photographer and National Geographic explorer Mandy Barker returned to the English beach she visited as a child, she found shocking piles of plastic waste alongside the waves and delicate seashells. She also noticed a troubling air of indifference to the litter-strewn beach. So she set out to change the context. By collecting pieces of plastic waste and photographing them on a plain background, Barker made the trash surprising again. This image depicts 633 balls, which were collected from several beaches in countries and islands within Europe. It is part of a series that aims to create awareness about the issue of marine pollution by focusing attention on the football as a single plastic object with global significance. Next slide. If you licked one of these treats, you'd encounter cigarette butts, oil, oozing trash, and a whole lot of plastic and other unsavory pollutants. 3 art students collected water from 100 sites around Taiwan and then froze it into blocks. The artists hope to draw public attention to water contamination and inspire people to generate less waste. Can we share the video with how they did this? Surprisingly, or maybe not, it was more challenging finding compelling images of plastic waste solutions than it was finding those that documents the problem. This image is of the largest recycling plant in San Francisco, California. They handle 500 to 600 tons of waste daily. As one of the few plants that accepts shopping bags, it has more than double tonnage it recycles in the past 20 years. The conveyor belt is carrying mixed plastic to an optical sorter. 1 trillion plastic bags are used worldwide every year, most only used for minutes. Next slide, please. We've all heard the mantra, reduce, reuse, recycle. A fourth word has been recently added, refuse. A growing movement is aiming to refuse plastic altogether. This pint jar holds 2 years' worth of Catherine Kellogg's unrecyclable, uncompostable waste. She blogs about the zero waste lifestyle from a 300 square foot home she shares with her husband in Vallejo, California. Next slide. We wanted to make sure that there was a place in the exhibition where we would speak about the impact that has been made since the initiative launched. The change from plastic to paper wrapping of the US, UK, and India editions of National Geographic magazine will save more than 2.5 single-use plastic bags every month. We've launched 2 sea-to-source expeditions along the Ganges River and have awarded more than 50 grants in over 20 countries focused on addressing plastic pollution. Next slide. Here you see the work of the data visualization winners of the National Geographic and Sky Ocean Plastic Innovation Challenge. In 2019, National Geographic launched this inaugural challenge in partnership with Sky Ocean Ventures. They asked problem solvers around the globe to develop creative solutions in one of 3 innovation tracks: design, circular economy, and data visualization. The winners, German initiative #PerpetualPlastic, chose to communicate the scale of plastic waste collected from a Bali beach. Focusing on an unlikely object, the flip-flop, they created a breathtaking data sculpture that visualized the path of all plastic ever produced. Next slide, please. Towards the end of the exhibition, we outlined several steps people can take to address the issue of the plastic waste crisis. You can avoid shoes made of plastic, either by buying fewer shoes or seeking out styles made of natural materials. Request that brands develop models that can be recycled, cutting out the use of disposable plastic cutlery, or using only biodegradable or compostable versions. Obviously, the steps highlighted would need to have local relevancy for the community. Next slide. At the end of the exhibition, visitors are asked to take our pledge, to choose the planet over plastic, and to share how they will make efforts to reduce their use of single-use plastic. This is the pledge panel at the ArtScience Museum. Next slide. And this is a screen grab of the pledge online. Through the pledge, over 330 million items have been prevented from entering the ocean. Next slide. In the end, the choice is up to each of us. We are faced with dozens of decisions each day that make an impact on the earth, our shared home. While actions like using a plastic straw or throwing away a plastic water bottle seem insignificant, they add up. And marine animals don't have a choice. They are forced to live in an environment that is filling up with our waste. Public interest is a catalyst that will continue to drive resources towards research, regulation, and responsible waste management practices. But collectively, we also need to address the issue at the heart of the problem. How much plastic does the world really need? For the good of our home, our animals, and ourselves, it is important that we end our reliance to plastic and choose the planet over plastic. Thank you.
Cynthia, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through the exhibition. It's really great to hear you speak about a project I know you're very, very passionate about. I have to say that when we began working on this project with you, I felt I had a reasonable understanding of the challenges that we face in terms of our environment. But then this exhibition presented me with some very harsh realities. You mentioned right at the beginning of your presentation the power of photography. And I think the photographs in this exhibition are both striking and seductive. But as you kind of move through the exhibition, the awful reality of what you're looking at kind of hits home, and the images become quite shocking. There's an extraordinary tension between the beauty of the images and the feelings of disgust that they seem to promote. And there's one small image. I have to talk about it because I always find myself focusing on this image when I go through the exhibition, and it's the smallest image. It's the image of the water flea, which has the microscopic pieces of plastic in the stomach. And I think, I might be wrong, but the water flea is basically at the bottom or near the bottom of the food chain. And that chain ends with us, with food that we eat. And I read somewhere that we could be ingesting as much as 5 grams of plastic every week. And that's the same amount of plastic as is in a credit card. I mean, it's truly shocking, but it's a story that is told so powerfully through this one small image in the exhibition. And I think this is where National Geographic really excels in the work that you do. You have an incredibly powerful platform and a global presence, which has been developed over 130 years of doing this kind of research, conservation, and essentially visual storytelling. So we've got some questions coming in, but I'm going to ask you a question and then I'll go and look at the other questions.
Okay.
So that I don't have this huge pause while I'm trying to go through these questions. So I know that you're working on many projects simultaneously and you're touring exhibitions kind of all the time. So besides Planet or Plastics, maybe you could tell us about 1 or 2 of the other projects that you're working on right now and how those might be encouraging or actually delivering the kind of real world changes we all want to see in our environment. Maybe you can share something about your other projects.
Sure, that's a good question. Thank you, Adrian. Early into the COVID-19 pandemic, we launched a global emergency fund for journalists that were documenting the crisis in their own communities. So right now we're actually working on an exhibition of the work from the journalists. So that's just an example of one of the exhibits that we're working on right now. And I agree with you also regarding your statement about that image of the water flea. I think it just goes to show you how pervasive the situation is and how it impacts all manners of life, and something that really resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, it's something that gives us all pause. When I've been watching visitors in the exhibition, it's surprising how many people linger much longer than I would expect in front of the images. I think it takes a while for the reality of the image to sink in. So I'm going to take a question from the forum because there's quite a lot coming in and it's going to be a bit tricky for me to keep up. So this question is from Chris Crawley. And says, is it known how much plastic waste in the ocean originates in rivers that flow into the sea as compared to dumping from ships or garbage barges that dump directly offshore? Are there signs of progress with reducing these sources? These seem like the bigger sources compared to people dropping plastic on beaches.
Yeah, it was a little bit hard to see in that presentation, but one of those maps that had the circles, the pink circles and the larger circles highlights that just where are the source of the plastic that's being dumped into the sea. So I would encourage Chris to go on the website to see the map, or certainly if Chris is in Singapore, to visit ArtScience Museum to see the map also. And then what was the second part of the question?
So the first part of the question was, it was a comparative about how much plastic flows into our oceans from the rivers, and how much plastic might be being dumped in the oceans from ships or even from trash barges.
Oh, the trash barges, I'm not sure, but that yellow, the yellow icon on that map was referring to the waste that was getting dumped from the river. Yeah.
I've got it. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. I was quite intrigued by, let me just scroll down here. I was quite intrigued by the number of, there's a large number of artists that you're working with, actually. So I've got a couple of questions about that. How do you find the artists and explorers that you work with? So like the group of artists from Taiwan, for instance, I mean, how did you get to know about that work, or was that commissioned work, or perhaps you can explore that a little bit?
Yeah, that work in particular was they were found by the magazine, the editors in the magazine. So we really worked for this exhibition in particular. We worked quite closely with the editors of that single topic issue, the June 2018 issue of National Geographic magazine. But we really, with all of our exhibitions, try to have as well-rounded or tell as well-rounded a story. So we are looking for those artists and photographers, those visual storytellers, really that are doing the work in their communities to highlight the issue that we are talking about. And with a topic like Planet or Plastic, we wanted something that resonated with as broad an audience as possible. It is a global issue, and we wanted also global representation for that.
Okay, that's interesting to know. I'm sure there'll be many artists across Singapore and the regions now who will be starting to send you images of. So you might find yourself inundated. No,
that's sorry. Great.
So there's another question from the floor, which is from Farhana Fayed, who asks, where do we start? Stop producing plastic products, or start asking people to stop using plastic products? It's kind of like, do we have to stop producing it, or do we have to stop using it? Where do we start?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely production has ramped up in terms of plastic, but I think just like it was highlighted in one of those panels about the 3 and now 4 R's in terms of reducing, reusing, and recycling. Just make sure that if you are using plastic products, that you're able to responsibly recycle them and refuse plastic products as much as you can.
Yeah, on a personal level, I found that at the latter end of the exhibition, where you have those steps that one can take and recommendations for how to limit plastic use, I realized that I can only tick off 3 out of 6. And I thought,
that's great.
Okay, maybe I can do more. So, yeah. But I thought I was doing pretty well, but I was only getting half marks, so I was a bit disappointed with myself. And during the opening day's press conference, I also realized that the entire group, it wasn't a huge group, it was only like 3 of us, because we had to be safe distanced and all. As we were talking about the choosing to wear shoes that were not made of plastic, we all looked down and we realized that everyone was wearing plastic shoes. Yeah. So we were also kind of like slightly unaware of it, if you know what I mean. And so just the fact that that last part of the exhibition makes you aware of it is like a sea change.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, plastic has really taken over, I think, all aspects of our lives. So the fact that you wouldn't have known that even your shoes were made of, plastic is, I'm sure it's a common thought amongst lots of people.
Yeah, it was a shock to us, I can tell you.
Yeah.
So there's another question here from, I'm going to be asking you lots of questions because they seem to be coming in quite fast. So this is from Catherine Vasquez, who says, what's your opinion? Should we tax the use of plastics and then channel the tax revenue to the development of environmentally friendly materials?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of community and regional based solutions that make sense for your area. So in a lot of communities, they have started to tax, there's a tax on plastic bags, for example, or a ban on plastic bags. And I think you all did actually, at ArtScience, did a great job in highlighting in that solutions for a cleaner future section, highlighting ways to help mitigate the problem that makes sense for the local communities. So I think it's not necessarily a one size fits all solution. It really depends on your region and where you are and what is the problem, the plastic problem in that specific community.
Do you think that the global COVID-19 pandemic has impacted on our use of plastics, particularly perhaps in regards to touring exhibitions?
In regards to touring exhibitions?
Yeah, but generally for all of us, but then maybe specifically in the way that we think about touring exhibitions, because Planet of Plastics, your project, is a very different sort of touring exhibition.
Right, and I think it has fast-tracked probably the way that we deliver our exhibitions. This was, as you know, we were fully remote in the installation of the exhibition, so that the production, you bore the brunt of the production for the exhibition. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and you're in Singapore, but we were able to still mount an exhibition remotely. In terms of the plastic issue with COVID-19, I think that it's probably pretty early to tell, but I'm sure that there probably has been less or more use, certainly, of plastic because of it. People are relying on more of the when you're taking out at a restaurant, for example, when you're taking out food, or the plastic cutlery, things of that nature.
Yeah. I think that's particularly relevant in Singapore because there's a hugely successful. I mean, Singapore is a foodie place. Everyone is a connoisseur in Singapore. And throughout the 2 lockdown circuit breaker periods in Singapore, so many of the really great local foods places were delivering. And I know that during my circuit breaker periods, I collected a huge number of plastic containers, and I was quite concerned about it, but we were not in a position at that time to do anything about it. It's not like we could in the first one anyway, you couldn't go and collect it. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, quite tricky. So right. I think that is made apparent in the exhibition as well. There is some use of plastic, which is kind of super important in terms of protecting our medical frontline workers, in terms of getting water to drought-stricken places. These are the plastics that seem very essential, but then the massive overproduction of plastic toys that you showed at the very beginning of your presentation from the EU town.
Trade City, yeah.
Trade City. I mean, that's also quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's then you become aware of kind of like this. You ask yourself the question: do we really need 500 different varieties of inflatable plastic balls?
Right.
Do we need to be doing that?
I think there's a quote in the exhibition from Sylvia Earle where it says that plastics aren't inherently bad. It's what we do or don't do with them that counts. And I think that's really highlighted by having that section where we talk about the PPEs and how it's been used for automotive safety and in the medical fields. But then again, like you said, with the Trade City and inflatable pools.
So there's another question here from the chat rooms. A question from Federica P. Do you plan to bring this conversation on the extent and threats of marine plastic pollution forward with your next project, or is there going to be a kind of follow-on project for Planet of Plastics, such as on what various stakeholders are doing to tackle the problem?
Yeah, there is a section in the exhibition where we talk about the solutions that various stakeholders, anything from community personal engagement to scientists and corporations, are doing to tackle the issue. And I think this is the first of a series of conversations that we are having about the issue of planet or plastic. And I know that in a few weeks, you guys are going to have another one of these type of talks that that highlights it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've also built a partnership in Singapore with a local organization called Seven Clean Seas.
Mm.
And later on in this year, we'll be working with them to promote some beach cleanups, which people can sign up and become involved in. So it's a very practical and real outcome. A little bit like the kind of the latter part of the exhibition where you've produced this pledge, which I think is kind of is a really important component of the exhibition, where people sign up to take these kind of actions.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another question here. This is from Daniel Chu Chen Lee. Can recyclable plastic waste picked up from the seas, lakes, and rivers be made into floating platforms for floating farms, floating parks, and floating sports fields or other floating infrastructure?
We've seen that, and I think we've seen that where people are using recyclable or recycled plastic waste and turning it into other products, everything from coffee cups to insulation for buildings and things of that nature. So I think there are a lot of engineers that are working towards that.
Mm-hmm. That's right. There's one of the films in the exhibition which refers to an artist that ArtScience Museum has worked with before, an artist engineer that we've worked with before. So yeah, it's I think the organization is called MiniWiz.
MiniWiz with Arthur Wong. Yes, you're right.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier some other projects that you're working on, but I'm quite interested to know about the process for developing new exhibitions. I saw that you had a couple of slides in your presentation where you were kind of going through an editing process. But Nat Geo is a huge global organization with diverse teams spread out all over the world, a huge portfolio of projects. How do you start? How do you decide what to focus on and which artists and explorers that you might work with?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, and we definitely want to highlight those stories of impact, and we lean in quite heavily on all of those properties like the magazine, either books or channel, in order to tell those stories. We also have a rather robust grant program where we support journalists and scientists and explorers, and they generally make it into the editing or the basis of our exhibition. So we're highlighting stories that come from different properties within the organization. But it is sometimes an abundance of riches, as you said, because there's a lot of images, there are a lot of stories that can be told. But starting with what is that core image, that idea is how we start.
So it could start from one key image, and the whole thing could spin off from there.
Right, and then how do you tell that? I mean, for the planet or plastic, that image with the plastic iceberg, I think was a particularly iconic and strong one. And then how do you tell the story of plastic from its early invention to what the mounting global crisis that we are in the midst of right now?
So there's another question from the floor, which is from SY. Could you let us know what are the calls to action, other than the pledging, And what can Singaporeans, or specifically Singaporean youths, do to combat climate change?
That's a great question. And other than the pledge, I think that at ArtScience, you guys actually localized that section and have some solutions. And if I'm not mistaken, you had mentioned with 7 Clean Seas that you are going to be doing a cleanup. So that's just one of those examples where we're looking for local solutions and really relying on the partners that we work with in each of the museums where the exhibition is shown to do something that makes sense for their communities, whether it's a beach cleanup or educational resources that are provided to school children. Yes.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it there. The latter part of the exhibition provides many suggestions for what we can do to make significant change in our day-to-day lives. I think, as you mentioned, Cynthia, the 7 Clean Seas beach cleanups, we're working with them to arrange a couple at the end of this year and a couple at the beginning of next year. But if people are really passionate about it, they can reach out to the organization and find out more and volunteer and become part of that network.
That's great.
And then everything that you said about, recycle, refuse, and so on and so on. These are things which you have to be, in my experience in Singapore, you have to be kind of ahead of it. So my challenge is if I'm at a hawker center or I'm ordering some bubble tea or something, I have to kind of, even before I give the full order or complete the order, I have to say, plus I want to use my own cup, plus I don't want a straw.
Right.
You kind of have to preempt it, otherwise they've already done it.
It's already packaged and given to you.
Yeah, it's so kind of sort of second nature, they do it automatically. So you kind of have to be ahead of the game a little bit. So I want to go back to something that we were talking about a little bit before, which is about how Planet of Plastics came together as a touring exhibition, because it is quite unusual for a touring exhibition organization such as yourselves to give over so much content and so much authority and so much freedom to the receiving institution. I mean, that's why it's been a really fantastic experience to work with you guys on it, because you kind of just trusted us to deliver it. That was really, really nice, and it was very freeing, and it gave us the opportunity to add more content and to work with your content and make the exhibition very specific to Singapore and ArtScience Museum. And I wonder whether this is the future of touring exhibitions now, particularly when we're talking about primarily photographic exhibitions, because it's perfectly possible. How do you think the touring exhibition landscape has been affected by the COVID-19 crisis, and do you think it will ever really recover?
Well, firstly, I think you guys did an amazing job. Unfortunately, we're not able to see it here. We're not able to see it physically, but from the images and videos that you've shared so far, it's wonderful to see just the iteration that you all did at ArtScience. And I do think that this crisis has definitely changed the landscape of traveling exhibitions. And I think that some of the actions that you've taken in the exhibition highlight that. Even with I believe I saw a photograph where your pledge station, you tap it on your foot, right?
Yeah, exactly. We have the last section of the exhibition, we've kind of expanded, and all of the interactives, we've kind of got a whole series of interactives, but instead of them being like activated by hand, they're activated by foot, so that you don't have to touch them, and so they're kind of COVID friendly, if you want, if there's such a thing as COVID friendly, but
right, and then
safe, I suppose.
Exactly, COVID safe. And with things like photographic exhibitions, they're relatively low touch, and you can reasonably socially distanced. So when communities and museums are feeling safe to have people enter into their museums, I think that it's still a place. Museums still have a place in society post-COVID, and being able to still provide that for communities is something that I think is really, really important. But as I mentioned before, it's really just fast tracking this emphasis on trusting the partners that you're working with, and to be able to produce the exhibition.
Within the team in the last 6 months, we've done a lot of kind of deep thinking about the practice, our practice as curators, and how this situation might change the way that we work in terms of our curatorial practice. And we always find ourselves reverting back to this idea of care, which is really the root of curation. And we've realized that it's kind of, it's about care for the object and the meaning and the integrity of the work, but it's also care for our visitors to make sure that they have a positive experience, that they have a good experience, that they have a safe experience, that they have an enjoyable experience. So suddenly we're kind of thinking, well, this is kind of prime.
Right.
It's kind of like, it's our fundamental objective before and in advance of all the other things that we want to do in terms of articulating new ideas or looking at new initiatives, new technology, new cultural advances. Yes, we can do all of that. But at the bottom line, we want our visitors to have this good, cared for experience when they come to the museum. And that's, I think, what they get with Planet or Plastic. It's spacious, it's beautiful, it's troubling in places, but actually at the end of it, it leaves you with a very kind of positive feeling that you can take positive steps. And in doing that, you can make a change, you can make a difference.
I think that's great that you're really putting your audience at the center of the story and care for the audience. So leave them with information, but also feeling inspired that they do have the ability to make an impact on their world.
Exactly. So Cynthia, we're getting kind of close to the end of the session. And I might just get a little bit up close and personal now.
Okay.
So among the many shows that you've been responsible for in your career with National Geographic, is there one that is like the closest to your heart? Do you have a favorite one?
Ooh, that's hard. Do I have a favorite? Yeah. Do I have a favorite one? That I don't know that I necessarily have a favorite one, or that it probably changes all the time. I think my favorite or most memorable aspect of it is just seeing how the exhibit evolves and changes depending on where the venue is. Your installation in Singapore is different than how it looked like at the UN Visitor Center, which is different than how it looked like in Italy. And I think that's a beautiful thing, depending on where we are and who the audience is, then the show takes on a different relevancy. And I think that's beautiful, because as global as the organization and these stories are, the fact that people can see themselves in the story, I think is really great.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating to look at some of the documentation you sent us of previous exhibitions and to see how different ours is. So that was quite a surprise to me as well. Cynthia, it's been a real joy to chat with you, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and for launching our Climate Conversations series. The second Climate Conversations talk will be live streaming on the 20th of October and will feature National Geographic explorer Intan Suci Nurhati, who is the senior researcher at the Indonesian Institute of Sciences Research Center for Oceanography in Jakarta. So Intan will be speaking about her research work on the monitoring of plastic waste in the environment, and of course, the rise of pandemic-driven plastic waste. Her talk will highlight these issues and the importance of local action in terms of plastics management. Intan will be in conversation with Dr. Yannick Kool, who is National Geographic Society's Senior Director of Programs and Explorer Development for the East Pacific region. So please, everybody, join us for our upcoming climate conversations talks if you can. And we hope you get a chance to visit Planet or Plastic at ArtScience Museum between now and March next year. So more details on the exhibition, the talk series, and associated events, including the 7 Clean Seas beach cleanups, which you can sign up for, can be found on the museum's website. So Cynthia, thank you once again, and thanks to everyone who has been listening in this evening. We very much appreciate your comments and questions. Please stay safe and healthy, and we will end this evening's event with a goodbye from me and from the team behind the scenes here at ArtScience at Home. So thanks everyone once again, and good night.
Thank you.